your dice, let's roll tonight. All the fun in the spotlight. Inside sharp and laughter bright. We're tuning in for delight.
All right, it is the half hour on my time. I want to be respectful of all your times. We can go ahead and get started. Welcome to Roll for Insight, a DM interview series hosted here at Altrole. I am joined by our guest, Mattmakeslight, that I'll let introduce in a second. Couple of just housekeeping notes. And feel free to drop your questions as we go along in event chat 1. We'll go through them, and you all will have a chance to ask questions to Matt as well. And then our final reminder is we are also audio recording this event to be used for later alt-roll purposes. But to kick us off, Mattmakeslight, if you want to introduce yourself, how you got involved with alt-roll, and how you got involved in running games, that'd be great.
Hello, I'm Matt. Mattmakeslight, but my real name is not hard to discern. I got involved with D&D during the pandemic, actually, because there was no theater happening, and my buddies and I were trying to find ways to bring chaos and randomness and consequences into the kind of like theater work that we do in Los Angeles. So I was like, well, D&D's got all that weird dice stuff, maybe that'll work. And I started listening to a lot of Critical Role while I had nothing to do in a dark theater, and ended up kind of getting hooked and wanting to play. And then I got involved with Altrole because, let's see, at the time when Altrole was still new, the lovely Bill was tricking people off of Reddit into joining the server, saying that there were games available. And I joined and actually ended up meeting a DM on the server, Grognerd, who many of you have probably interacted with, who happens to actually live near me in real life. And I ended up playing in a couple games with him and some of the other people I met on here. So I started kind of playing on Altrole, actually.
I've had the pleasure of playing in a one-shot that you ran. I think at this point it would have been 2 or 3 years ago, the little carnival-ish one-shot you ran. And
oh, cool. I actually forgot you ran that shit. My bad.
It's okay. I forgot about it too, because like it was just like a one-off one-shot that we just kind of like threw together real quick, but it ignited my love for making like inverse characters, and so I played a rogue that was a carny in it, and that started my love of taking the concept of like a rogue, but like what's the opposite of like a thief. And
yeah, totally.
But how, when you run games, do you have a preference between like I like long story, Critical Role-esque narratives? Do you like I like small, concentrated vignettes a la Dimension 20? Do you like I like one shots to where it's just like this snapshot of pieces? Do you have a preference on what you typically enjoy more?
The length matters as much to me. Although I am currently running the planned longest game that I've ever run. But it's less about the length and more about like what is the story that I have available and what is the story that is fun to tell. Some stories can be done in two sessions and some need a lot more. So to me, it's like as long as I have a concept, I don't want to push the concept further than it deserves. In a lot of ways. So to like when I've signed up for campaigns, I've told people like, hey, I don't promise anything beyond this little arc. If we're having fun and we go further, that's great. But to me, it's like, do I have enough to tell a good story that isn't bloated or lost? And I've had various different ideas, and I can kind of tell right away when I come up with an idea, like, oh, this is probably like 3 levels and 10 sessions long. And to me, that's perfectly good because I can just tell the players like, hey, I expect it to be like this, and that way there's no like missed expectations. But I like stories that make sense. I like them grounded in some kind of plot reality, even if it's not true reality. Because to me, like that way, I can justify everything and find ways to like screw with the players and really get them to buy in, rather than like, hey, this is a great story. I don't really know where we're going yet. So I go off of intention.
Can you talk to me more about that? Because I think that's really interesting. You've been running games for a bit, so you kind of have a feel and you've kind of developed your style. Talk to me through the process and how you determine of like, oh, this is a 3-4 session story I'm telling. This is like a 2-level story I'm telling. How do you make that determination?
The DMG's got decent-ish advice. I think the tiers of play stuff is kind of really helpful, not in like a rule, but in a guideline and kind of a milestone sense. So, the last campaign I ran, I knew I wanted to keep it hyper local. I wanted like one town in this area that I was developing. And I didn't want the players to go that much further. I didn't want to have to deal with, long travel. I didn't want to deal with a ton of wilderness and trekking. So, okay, we're going to have this little town. There's going to be a monster who's terrorizing the town. Players get hired. And I think that, we'll end the story with the players solving it and the town recognizing that these are all heroes. So to me, like the tiers of play kind of thing, like that's around level 5 when you get, regional notoriety. So, okay, we're going to start at level 2, we'll end around level 5, we'll see. And now I just need to kind of have enough to fill those gaps in terms of like different encounters and ideas and where this plot could go. And, in that campaign, it was quite literally, you're in a town, you all meet, you are hired, find the lost boy. They go out to find the lost boy, and they learn a few more things about this monster that then begins terrorizing the town for the next, I think it was like 12 sessions or something like that campaign lasted. And it felt really good because I never had to like come up with the next story to make sense with what I laid down. It was like, I know the story. The story is this. The players are going to do their things and make me rewrite the story because that's what players do. But I didn't need to worry about like, oh my god, what am I going to do in session 14? Or, oh my god, I need to introduce this person to them who's going to have to last for the entirety of the campaign. Like, it took a lot of that off the table and allowed me just to focus on like one really tight campaign story, kind of a deal. So like I use the kind of tiers of play and ideas of like where the player characters would start and end the journey, and kind of fill in the gaps from there.
But I think that's such a smart way to do that. Walk me through what your prep looks like, what your like campaign prep looks like, what your session prep looks like. What's your method for it?
I like to build the world a lot and session prep very little. At least for my current campaign, I've been doing that a lot more. Where to me, the focus is on, does the world make sense? Do the things that are happening around the players make sense? So I really have a good sense of like what the factions are doing and the city politics and the kind of details of the world, because I want the choices my players make to matter. And if I over prep my sessions, I feel like I end up railroading them. Whereas if I spend a lot of times on, okay, these characters want this, I want to make sure that players learn this, these factions are trying for this, then no matter what my players kind of do, I can basically make up an NPC on the spot to like be someone to talk to and have a reason to give them a clue. Or I can find interesting encounters that might fit in the world, no matter where they go, because I've decided like, okay, in the scope of this world, one of the consequences of it is creatures from the past are now appearing that shouldn't be there. So because I've just decided that, and that's part of the game's story, I could basically drop in an encounter with any this is not normal creature, and it fits the story as much as it fits for like wanting a bit of a challenge and a combat on this section. Um, I don't need to like come up with a motivation for bad guys every single session, or let the plot get so complex to justify a combat, because the very nature of the story has decided, and like my world building prep has decided that all of these things are on the table. So like, okay, they're on an airship. Well, prehistoric creatures are in the air too. I can have any kind of combat that I want and just say these creatures don't exist. That's why it's so weird. That's now part of the mystery. And I kind of just, I don't know, surround my table with all the different toys that I can play with and decide which toy is the most relevant on any given session.
I think that reflexivity is such a key part to running a game of uh, having the ability just to kind of, as you described, I don't need to know specifically what's happening, but I need to know the elements of what's happening, and then based off of how the players kind of react and engage, I can kind of move the puzzle pieces and plug up and play around. My The thing that I kind of want to dive a little bit deeper on is you mentioned how it's important to you for your world to make sense. Where do you draw the line between I want the world to make sense, but now I'm in like Wikipedia rabbit hole about the certain subspecies of plants in this desert region that can grow? Where do you like at some point where do you just go like, hey, look, like this makes sense, and if there's a couple things that like don't make sense, I'm okay with that.
Coincidentally, this is actually a thing that is part of my professional career, which is verisimilitude over feeling right. Um, I remember like being in school a long time ago, and one of the big questions that they ask like lighting designers and cinematographers is, how do you light a dark room? Because the real answer is you don't. It's fucking dark. The whole point of it is that you can't see in the dark. But that doesn't make for a good theater play if you can't see anything. That doesn't make for a good movie if you can't see anything. So we've all agreed collectively as like the movie going public that a dark room means that there's really dark blue light, and that's what dark means within the idea of this medium. And it's not correct, but the vibe is right. It feels right. We as an audience have bought into that is what we've decided a dark room is. And so to me, like the D&D world is the same thing. Like, I don't need the world to actually be correct. I just need the vibes to be right. Like, I don't give a shit about the flora, the fauna. Does this agave actually live in the highlands or the lowlands? As long as it feels unique and right and isn't so far out of the bounds that my players are like, oh, that's weird. To me, that's enough, because we're here for the game, not for how clever my world building is. Like, I'm not even here for how clever my world building is. So it's about, does it feel right? Do I have enough to make it make sense for the game?
We're here for the vibes. I love as long as the vibes are immaculate, that's really all you need.
Yeah, kind of. Like it's a game about monsters and rolling dice and beating up people with your skills. Like, do I really need to care about like the nitty gritty of the black market economy? Nah. I have a smuggler, I have a crime boss. Everyone kind of buys in on that. Let's fucking go.
Very early on when I started running a game, I got way too into that rabbit hole because I kept coming back to like in D&D, in like the high fantasy genre, if magic exists, what is the point of literally anything else? Like why do you have to have chefs in any tavern if you can just create food and water, or you can just have a bowl of good berries that sustain you for a full day? And so like I got I got really down bad in that logical like, what's the point of anything if magic solves everything? And then at some point it's just like, because then you don't get to play a game, and that's not fun.
Right. Well, and you can also make like the justification of like, well, magic is either something you need to work your ass off for and like go to school, in which case, cool, only the rich white kids of like my D&D world can afford it natively, and everyone else has to like sneak in, or you're born with it, in which case not everyone has it. That's enough. I'm good with that. That's my explanation. Let's move on.
What are some of the things? What are some of the resources you use in your DMing? Whether they be like virtual tabletop stuff, whether it just be like go to places you find like maps or inspiration from. What are the things that like help you manifest what is in your head onto in the game?
In terms of D&D centric tools and resources, I run my games in Foundry. I find that I just like that one the most. It works the way my brain does. I love supporting other artists and kind of creators. Like I pay for a lot of my content and like encounter maps. Tom Kartos, Traxian Bear. I also really like creative homebrewers. Like everyone knows like some of the names like Griffin Saddlebag and Conflicts Creatures. The guy, fake name is Mark, who like creates these really really great reinterpretations of D&D monsters that I like their features a lot. So as one artist to another, I like to support other creators, and I'd rather pay for that than like a Netflix subscription or something like that. So a lot of the D&D resources come from other creators in the community, because I don't draw maps very well, and if someone does, I'd rather have pay them to do what they do really well. When it comes to non D&D stuff, I read a ton. I love watching TV and movies, and again, like my professional career is basically how to manipulate other people's ideas and stories. So to me, just the more stories that I consume, the more interesting my games can be, because I can draw upon really esoteric kind of ideas and source material to just blatantly steal from, to be perfectly frank. And if you steal in ways that again feel right and the vibes match the world, then the players have a good time and no one cares.
Yeah, I look, shout out to Monsters Know What They're Doing.
Hell
Fantastic
yeah.
blog. It's so great. It is so the amount of resources that like, oh, if someone already like did the hard part of like, figuring out the logic behind this, and then I just have to understand it and then I can run it, I'm all for it.
Yeah,
Going
and
into
again, like knowing about their intentions is important because like the monsters are know what they're doing is a great example where like in the one shot you were talking about earlier, my carnival one shot, like I know like in my head the bad guy is a narcissist. The bad guy likes to control people, so all of his skills are going to do with that. But that's not really damaging. So what makes sense for damage? He holds him down and laughs while his little underlings stab you like crazy, and like the entire tactics of the big battle fight was based on those two little characters stealing from media. Of he like wraps you up in rope, laughs at you, and whistles like a carny barker, and then this little invisible elf just stabs everybody. And that's really great because it wasn't about like which features do I need to fit or like how do I run this monster. The monster was based off of how would this asshole actually treat people. And like resources like the monsters what they're doing was a large part of that. It really helped out actually.
I remember that battle because in the tent in the carnival, there were like ropes or something that you
Yeah.
had like run down and try to grab us. And I remember being like, I'm a rogue. My whole thing is movement, and now now my speed is 0, and I was so angry. Um, we talked about like your session and campaign prep. Move me to now, um, session 0. We also talked about how you put a big emphasis on making the vibe right. How do you communicate the vibe of the story you're trying to tell to the players in like a session 0, so that way their characters match your vibe?
I'm going to answer this in two parts because the with like the one shots and stuff that I've run or some of my older campaigns, a lot of it was just saying like, hey guys, here's like all some like some of my favorite media. Here's the kind of stories that I like to tell. I talk to them about I'm very much I like the rules of D because they're good frameworks, but when the rule doesn't make sense for what we're trying to do in the game, I will absolutely bend and break some rules when it makes sense. And some players don't like that. I give them the chance to kind of like get the vibe of there may be some rule of cools or some rule of hey, we're just gonna do this for right now. And that kind of helps kind of establish a little bit more of a looser, less formal game. Like the last session 0 that I ran, and I will admit that this is a privilege and I'm very, very lucky. Everyone at my table are people that I've played with before. So they already all kind of had a sense of either me as a player or me as a GM. And a lot of that didn't have to be a discussion because they were all game for it by the nature of like, yes, we'd love to be in your next game. But I will admit that is not how it always is, especially with all groups. So that helped out a lot. But even then, it's really good to like have those discussions and kind of, hey guys, like this is going to be a little more of a long-term campaign, so maybe less outwardly joking or being silly, although silliness is great because like if it's a longer campaign, we want the characters to take it seriously. And those kind of conversations are always really helpful, I think, too. Um, for one shots and smaller things, the one that I recommend to people all the time is just straight up tell your players like what their characters before the session even starts. Like again, going back to the one shot that you guys ran, like I straight up told you 3 days before, hey, you guys, we're all level 3, and you guys have been working with each other for like weeks already. So whatever you guys tell me, like, hey, this character has this feature, can I do this with them? I'm gonna say yes because that's more interesting to you all, rather than let's figure it out in like, the 4 hours that we have to run the session. So I often use session 0 to give them the baseline of what they can get away with in some ways before they need to ask me and worry about like it derailing the session later. And then all the other like normal safety stuff, triggers, no goes. I lay down my rules about what lines will not be crossed. One of my big ones is sexual assault is not a plot point. It may exist in the world, but it doesn't need to be a part of my game because I don't need time. And I just lay that kind of stuff out for players too, so that they kind of feel that they know that I'm not going to drop major trauma points in the game for no reason or because like I'm coming up with lazy plot points. So I use session 0 for all of that.
How as you kind of work to work with your players and make sure everything is set to have a good campaign, whether it be a small vignette or a longer one. How do you get your players' backstories to match the setting, and more so, how do you involve the players' backstories in your storytelling?
I kind of give them a spectrum that's open to them. I say, I'll say, here's the world or here's the region that we're playing in. It has this kind of things, these kind of people, and I'll give them enough where if they want to be a part of that world locally, they have a lot that they can utilize, and I'll work with them for. And when they choose that option, and I'm very upfront about this, this is not a surprise. It's not like a secret benefit. I tell them straight up, the more local you are to where the game world starts, the more you're going to be tied into the outward plots. The further you want to go away from that, the less it will be catered to your character's backstory. But that doesn't mean that I'm not going to focus on your character any less. Because some players like that too. Some players want the experience to be the Outlander and for the world to be very new to their character, and I want to respect that. But I tell them that I'm not going to find a way to shoehorn something from hundreds of miles away into this particular story just to give everyone equal weight in terms of how much their backstory matters to the plot, but their backstory matters to character interactions, what they experience, and all that stuff. So I tell them in advance that there's kind of a sliding scale, and they get to pick where on that sliding scale they want to be. It's never a surprise. It's never me sandbagging them after the fact or after they've chosen something. So I try to just be realistic about it because everyone wants something different. So it's easier to give them the choice, frankly. In my current campaign, 2 of them are local. One of them is local-ish, but from a monastic hermit-y area. And another player flew in on an airship on a lark and knows nothing. And all of them get wildly different kind of character experiences with the plot story, and their backstory integration. And they like that. That's all been part of the fun of it, is how different it is. Unless they show up here and tell me that I'm failing, in which case, cool, I'll figure something out.
I think there's something that I really want to highlight and dig a little bit into. I think, and this was true for me, that when I first started running games and running D&D, that I built the world and I was like, oh, there's these great mysteries and the players are going to uncover these things during the sessions. And so I didn't give my players all the information that now I would have. So kind of how you talked about of saying, hey, here's the stuff you already know. Here's things about the world. I think there's a notion for new DMs to not kind of share as much because in their head it's oh, the players are going to uncover this. And then I remember as I started running my first kind of game early on, I would get to these things where I thought the players I'd have this lore drop ready, and then the players just missed it, but they didn't miss it because they didn't know to look for it to begin with because I never gave them a clue or an idea. My kind of turning this to a question for you is, where do you balance hey, players / characters, here's the information you would know, you need to know, or things that you might find useful versus letting the characters and the players find out that stuff themselves through playing?
This may be a failing on my part, and I'm sure that there are players who, if they were sitting at my table and I did this, would feel very taken out of the game. But again, going back to my entire professional experience is working from behind the curtain. So to me, there's absolutely nothing taboo about allowing my players certain glimpses behind the curtain and to why I'm trying to do something. So I straight up just check in with them a bunch. I don't ever give away plot or spoilers, but I'll say straight up hey guys, the goal of that last session was for you to learn this, this, and this. So I'm just putting it in the chat so that no one misinterpreted what your characters would have figured out because they know things that you as the players don't, because that's how the world works. So I don't punish my players for my inability to convey exactly what I want to convey to them, if that makes sense. I'm very open about what was the goal of the last session, what did you guys learn or should have learned, because it's amazing how many times like I thought I was very clear, but my player's like, "Oh shit, that's what you were saying." Um, and I've just learned over the part of it is like I'm older and I don't have a lot of ego about it. Of it's better just to pull the curtain back a little bit and give that to them because that makes the experience in my experience with them more fun for them. Um, and it's the idea of like think about the real world. Like we know so many like half information about so many things. Very little in our everyday experience in our lives is completely brand new to us. So like, oh my God, does my player or does my character know that like werewolves might be susceptible to silver? I'm like, well, fucking you do, and you've never fought a werewolf. Like, it's probably semi-common folklore. So yeah, fuck it, you've got an idea. Let's roll with that. Let's see what happens if I give you a little bit of that information. What does your character do with that? To me, that's more fun personally. And I play with players, or I guess I've self-selected players who vibe on that the same way that I do.
It's truly remarkable how in this collaborative storytelling game, how much the answer is just talk to each other, just basic communication, and everything will be okay.
And there have been instances where like I'll tell a player that, and the player will decide like, yeah, but my player doesn't understand that shit, so I'm gonna do this, and I'm like, fucking, let's go, all for it. Like I gave one of my players a nugget of information on one of our sessions, and she rolled the dice privately, and then she informed me that her player does not understand what that means, and therefore will be throwing the first punch. And I'm like, I love that because she didn't misunderstand. The player did not misunderstand the DM. The player chose to play her character the way she wanted to play the character, and that was a choice that she made to like let shenanigans and chaos reign. Hell yeah, all about it, because that was a game choice, not a mistake. As a player mistake, I should say.
And that's called player agency.
I tried.
Setting up your games a little bit before we start kind of jumping into you actually running them, do you have go-to or favorite house rules or modifications or like interpretations of rules that you are almost always likely to involve, or ones that you've been curious to test out, that kind of piqued your interest?
I don't remember who I stole it from, but I definitely stole it from someone on YouTube. You can take healing potions as a bonus action, but if you forego that and take a healing potion as the full action, you don't roll dice. You just get the full healing. It is one of my rules in my games. So I let you play the resource versus reward game for things like that. Because I like choices. I like making it something that a player has to decide if it's worth it to them or not. This is not a formal rule, but I think I'm turning it into one for my own games. I hate stunned on players. It is unfucking fun to stun a player in the mechanical definition of it, because then they can't do shit. So I like the kind of homebrewed like dazed condition that I've seen, which is like a half version of it. And I think that for monsters that I throw at players, I try not to stun them unduly because I think it's a really unfun game mechanic. But I absolutely let them use the stun on the monsters because again, the monsters are like, I am not the monsters. So I don't have any ego about like, was that monster fun for me? If it's a minion and gets stunned in one shot, I don't give a shit. That's fine. But a lot of my house rules are player focused. What is fun? What pushes the players to be more creative? Like I don't ban Twilight clerics, but I do think that their abilities are a little overpowered. But I told my players who were like thinking about it, I'm like, hey, in my experience, this ability makes you do the same thing every single combat, and I think that's less fun for me, and I think it's then less fun for you. And I just said that. I didn't ban it. I didn't say it's a rule. And eventually the player was like, you know what? I understand. I do want more creativity. Let's do something different. And then, like you said earlier, again, at the end of the day, it's all about talking to people. Because again, if that player was really dead set on those features and that kind of play style, I'm like, all right, I can make it work. Whatever.
I also use the bonus action potion rule, and I love it because I think it creates like an actual debate in the player's head on using their action economy in the most effective way. kind of like when you level up, nothing is worse when you level up a character and you roll for health and you get like a 1 or a 2, and you're like, cool, I go from a 10 HP wizard to an 11 HP wizard.
It's terrible. It sucks.
I think it's the same thing for like healing potions though, because they're also very expensive in game, especially like early levels when you don't have like a kingdom's worth of gold for the players. That it's just like, cool, I drank a potion of healing and I got back 3 hit points. Glad that was my turn. I hope I don't die now.
I think that rules also can be adjusted based on like what your players have chosen to do in the game itself, because like healing potions is a good one, right? Like if you've got 3 different players that all have healing abilities, I'll totally be more strict about what healing potions can do and run it more by raw or whatever. But if I've got, like a rogue, a fighter, a monk, and like a wizard, like, yeah, I could be like, no, you all didn't pick a cleric, and so you're shit out of luck. But like, again, that's not fun. Like that doesn't make the game any better for me to hoard a resource that by and large is there to keep the game interesting and be fun. So a lot of my rules, again, I kind of zhuzh a little bit based on party makeup, game intention, and like my players' style. I don't have like very big min-max players. They don't always make the most optimal decisions in combat. So I'm not going to punish them for that necessarily. I'll tell them when some combats are going to need them to think about it as the DM. But like by and large, if they're having a good time, I don't care. Whatever.
How do you help teach new players kind of like the rules of D&D and like kind of like what they can and can't do? Like how do you teach a new player that's kind of like learning the game, or like maybe this is their first game, of like, hey, you have to approach a combat with a flying monster differently than one that is just going to stand in front of you and play whack-a-mole? Do you have any like tips or tricks on like how to kind of like gently coach and guide and help the new players kind of understand the more nuancy things once the game kind of really starts to get past 5th level?
Yeah. Part of it is talking outside of the game, straight up asking like, does it bother you if I give you a hint? Or would you rather me DM you privately? Or would you rather me just let you flail? People have different thoughts on that and different defaults. So I'd just straight up, I'll ask them privately, like, how would you prefer me to help you? Is usually the best question that I can ask. I also try to use my narrative descriptions of the action with the idea of giving away tactics in mind. I do that for experienced players too. Like, I'd rather say, you see this happening, you may interpret it as such, or let them ask me how their players interpret, or their characters interpret it, rather than say, okay, you don't have this thing, or they're not getting, you're not doing full damage because they have resistances and all that stuff. So I'll start with, private asking, how do you want me to help you out? In game, I will start with narrative, and if all the players are struggling, then I assume that it's because I'm not explaining it properly. And like I said, that's when I just pull a little bit behind the curtain and be like, hey guys, by the way, this is what this thing is doing. You guys accordingly. And then just pull the curtain back and keep on going. Like 30 seconds of that keeps the game moving, to me, a whole lot better. And in a way that, again, my self-selected, admittedly biased players you generally find helpful.
I became a big fan of previewing hard encounters with the same concept of easy encounters. So like the first time that when I ran the game with new players, the first time they were gonna like come up against a dragon that like flies and like isn't just gonna stand there and take hits, I had them fight like several sessions ahead of time, fight something a lot weaker that also had the ability to fly. So it wasn't like the first time they were seeing this new game, kind of like this new mechanic or anything, is in like a big boss battle.
Yeah, exactly. Like the first time I ran minions against like the Matt Koval style minions mechanically against my players, I straight up said like, hey guys, roll initiative. We're gonna take a break. Before we go to break, here's how minions work. See you in 5 minutes. Like I just told them straight up that mechanically that's what it was gonna be. Because I didn't want them wasting 4 turns trying to figure out why some enemies were going down in one hit and some weren't. I just said straight up, here's what we're doing. Here's the game plan. Have fun. And that's, like, again, a step further than what you're describing. But like again, a new mechanic, a new rule, rather than surprise players, unless the surprise is narratively rewarding, which it can be, in which case I will absolutely withhold information. But if there's no narrative win to figuring it out and it's just a mechanical thing for this encounter, I'm way less precious about it.
Switching gears a bit, Matt, you're running the game. I get to be a player again. I have made the edgiest of edgelord rogues who has no family because their entire village was burned down. How do you handle a player like me?
Again, talking. You can absolutely have that character backstory, and I will roll with it as hard as you want to roll with, as long as I know two things. One, do you understand that this is a game and that the other players at the table deserve to have just as much fun as you? And two, are you going to buy into the story? As long as I trust that you're going to do those two things, you can be as broody and edgy and silent as you want. You can play your player selfishly, because the outside of the game intention is really much more important to me. You know, the first time you start going against other players, I'm going to pull you aside and be like, "Yo, dude, what the fuck?" Or if other players mention that it's a problem. But as long as everyone at the table trusts that the other player is doing it for the enjoyment of all or as a character choice, I'm pretty flexible with that kind of thing.
Can you talk to me a little bit, if you ever had to deal with this, or how would you deal with it, of a player going against kind of the social contract of the table? And so in kind of the example, my rogue starts stealing from other players or kind of being antagonistic, and then I'm just like, well, that's just what my player would do. Have you ever had to like deal with players like that? Like, walk us through kind of the process you did, or if you haven't, walk us through what you would do in those situations.
The first one I ever encountered was as a player, actually, where we had, the rogue, went ahead and opened up the treasure chest before we all got there and took a bunch of the treasure out. And I didn't know this player very well, so I didn't really know. And the DM admittedly was like running a game for like 7 or 8 people. It was a very big party, and they were dealing with a lot. So I remember in character, I'm like, can I perception check? My wizard was very much like into investigating everything, and the role basically suggested that I noticed how much gold was in the rogue's pockets that shouldn't have been there. And as a player, I decided to give the player the benefit of the doubt and kept my mouth shut. And then later on with the player, or with the between our two characters, I was like, hey, that shit ain't right. Are you on the team or not? And gave the character the choice of like, how does he want to play that? And if it was problematic, then we could have all taken a timeout. But the player, ended up, kind of saying stuff in character and stuff. And I was like, well, you're part of the team, right? And like, I gave him one of my items, which was like a hand crossbow that I had picked up in character. And that like diffused that whole situation, because before we hit the timeout spot, we had an opportunity where I could see, character to character, what are you trying to do here, buddy? And that was, in this instance, very effective. I will admit, it requires quite a bit of confidence on both players' parts to kind of pull off without it devolving quickly. But that was really, in that instance, that was really effective. And so as a DM, I would kind of see and encourage those kind of things too, of like, all right, I'll let this play out to an extent, but the moment I see it veering, or I feel the vibe of the table shift, or people are asking questions about it outside of character, that's like a quick timeout. Are we all having fun? Everyone good? Like characters arguing about plans is a really common one, and I have two players right now who love to in character like really bicker with each other and like insult each other. And every now and then it's just like, hey, pause, we good? And then they both laugh and smile. I'm like, cool, done. Let's move forward. Because again, 10 seconds of check-in to me is worth a lot of time of out of table drama and bullshit. So I 100% go back to pause the game, pull the curtain back a little bit, check in. Great, let's move forward.
How do you get comfortable doing that, though? I think sometimes we have like a conflict aversion, or we don't want to, we don't want to call out any perceived tension, because then we have to acknowledge that there's tension. So how do you actually get comfortable saying, okay, wait, time out, we need to like check in, or like we need to talk about this?
I mean, this is not the greatest answer, but age and experience. My entire professional career is telling people that their ideas are kind of bad and that there are better options. And so you just get used to being able to like phrase things and talk to people in that way, without it being a personal attack, and you get used to hearing it similarly. Like, so part of it is just again, you got to learn how to do it by doing it. And going back to what I was just saying earlier, it is way easier to diffuse 30 seconds of conflict by asking the question than to diffuse the conflict of everyone is now blown up. So, to me, part of the learning of it is actually still doing it the right way, which is again, just check in, because that little bit of conflict will end up forestalling a whole lot more of what you're actually dreading, which is we all have that dread of like conflict so bad that it like rips the table apart or ends the game. Um, but I think that most people, in trying to avoid it, end up reinforcing it because you let resentment breed up, and resentment is the thing that kills friendships and marriages and professional working relationships. Like, resentment is the thing that you need to fight against, not conflict, because conflict can be fixed really easily.
Very early on in my like professional career, I was taught the adage that you can be brutally honest without being brutal. And that
Yeah.
has gotten so much mileage of just like helping me, like both professionally and just like in life, of just like you can have conversations without being like mean and a dick to people. Um, if you just like take time to think about your word choice and like how you're phrasing things. That goes so much because no one likes being like attacked or being told they're wrong. And if you just um, think about like how you're actually saying things, that helps de-escalate stuff so much.
Well, and like, this has nothing to do with D&D. This is like a good life lesson. Like, people who take pride in being brutally honest are almost always assholes. People who hate being brutally honest but are willing to do it are generally going to be your best friends.
I agree. Have you ever jumping kind of back into this?
Sorry, yeah,
Have
that
you
was super
ever?
pedantic. I'm sorry, everyone.
No, you're good. Look, what is D&D if not role play therapy? Um, Have you ever run an evil campaign, or have you ever let a player play an evil character? To either of those, like how did you handle it, or like how would you handle it?
Again, it goes back to that kind of like edgelord question you asked earlier of, are you putting the game first before your evil character? If the answer is yes, I'm willing to play a lot with you, because evil characters can have motivations and there's gonna be logic. Chaotic evil is problematic. Lawful evil, you can do a lot with that, and that's assuming that you're going with the whole like tenets of alignment and all that stuff anyway. I have not run an evil campaign, although I think the next one that I run, I have this kind of Mad Max crusade, we conquer, join or die kind of vibe going on, that I think would be very willing to like work with a whole bunch of evil characters who are all trying to survive the same even worse thing. So that I don't know that it's planned to be an evil campaign, but I think it's one where if and when I run it next, it would be far more open to more blatantly selfish characters, because the selfishness would be what actually makes them all have to work together. Whereas I think it's harder to like work an evil character into a campaign that a DM wants to run, where like the hero fantasy is the driving force. Again, intention and vibe matters a lot. For inherently selfish assholes with a much more pressing problem can be a very good party together.
Look, vibes and communication. That's kind of the tone of our talk here. I want to switch a bit to how you set up um, combats and environments. How do you keep combats interesting for yourself and players, where they don't just turn into whack-a-mole who gets the 0 hit points first?
Are brutal. Um, no, yeah, I hate how much we're repeating the same answer, but honestly, like, again, know the intention of the combat. Um, the monsters know what they're doing is a fantastic resource for just kind of like monsters in general. But when it comes to like, say, sentient enemies, humans or other creatures, um, or factions, if you know their goals, you can have much more interesting combats, because very few creatures will willingly fight to the death. So most creatures have a sense in their brain of when they've lost, And what will they do when they lose? Will they cheat? Will they run? Will they give up and parlay? For even just monsters and hunters, like, okay, my ambush did not work. Now it's about surviving without breaking my leg, because if I break my leg as a predator out in the wilds, I'm done for. So if a combat becomes a slugfest, I will kind of like lean into, okay, well, what was the point of this combat? What are the bad guys thinking? How can we move the game forward without, going 3 more rounds until someone drops to 0? I also love bystanders and other things in the environment that matters. Like, yeah, these creatures might not be all that much of a threat to you, but if there's 20 of them and they're killing commoners left and right, well, now you have some decisions to make, or that kind of thing. Or one of my favorite things I did to my players was I dropped them in between 2 factions who were right about to tangle, and my idiot players had no idea who was in the right, and they jumped on in, and it became an absolute clusterfuck of different opinions and motivations from all the different parties involved. And it ended up being very interesting, because halfway through they realized, like, oh wait, the one dude we were protecting was actually the asshole here, and these 4 were all staking him out, and we've now kicked off the combat by getting involved. And so it's really fun for me to like keep the intentions of the bad guys in mind, because then I can be, again, flexible. And if I know my world, if I know the reasons characters in the world are acting as such, the game can be much more flexible.
I get a lot of inspiration on hearing like what other people do and kind of think about like what my interpretation of that would be. So with that, do you have any examples, or like thinking back through your GMing career, have there been any encounters that like really stand out to you of like, oh, I had a lot of fun with that one, or that one proved to be like really interesting? Whether it just kind of be like mechanics, whether it be setting, whether it be goals, that you had any kind of experiences or stories you have of ones that kind of stick out in your head?
Yeah, like the first one shot I ever ran, I stole from I don't know his true name. On Instagram, he goes by Grimoire Games, and it's the Ernest Drake one shot that I've run on the server before. And without giving too much away, there's a mechanic with the final bad guy that every single turn he pulses out like this wave of necrotic energy, and every character within 30 feet ages by 2d10 years. You cannot save against it. You cannot block it. It just happens. And the moment that gets explained to players in the middle of the combat, they all do a quick mental calculation of whatever race they've chosen, and they immediately realize who's in the most danger. And it completely changes the vibe of the combat without doing anything else other than that. Because like we ran it at one point with like a fairy character who, like, dude, my lifespan is only like 50 years. I'm dead in 4 rounds potentially. And it like you could feel the players change their attitudes to what we need to do to survive this, just by having like a weird kind of non-standard mechanic like that. And it's really fun to run that particular challenge because of how it affects players in ways that they could not mechanically plan for in any way. It's really free. I love those kind of like things like that. I had another one where I had I've talked about on this over too, a literal kamikaze kobold in a minecart, and it's actually more of a trap than it is a combat. But like how like it's just so far out of left field and they can't protect themselves from it mechanically. You can't plan your way through getting through it. You just have one chance to decide something before a consequence happens. I find those kind of like traps, hazards, and encounters a lot of fun, almost more so than combat.
In kind of the same vein, how do you make social encounters kind of interesting, whether it be like mechanically or rules, right? So the party has found a way to avoid having to roll initiative, or like the encounter isn't like at the initiative point yet. How do you run social encounters?
Uh, Again, I need to know what the NPC's goals are, because if I know that, then they can always respond to whatever shenanigans the players or the player characters make. And sometimes, like, again, you can use your intimidation to make a character back off, and that's perfectly fine. Okay, cool. But like, what are the consequences of that? Now there's a character who do they respect you? Do they resent you? Are they going to jump you with 5 other guys the next night you're walking home drunk to the tavern? To me, it's like I never just let that go. Like you can win a social encounter, but just like a combat encounter, if it's if everyone is just murderized at the end of it, there will always be some kind of fallout there. And I try to at least telegraph, if not outwardly tell the players that like this is a consequence. Like these guys are after you now because of this way. And I try to explain it in game or give them opportunities to learn via clues or rumors or whatnot. But again, social encounters have consequences, good and bad. If you really impress someone, I might turn them into an ally or at least an unwilling information source. Because I don't want to disincentivize players from trying to find non-combat solutions. There's nothing worse than, I rolled so high, I role played really, really well, but the DM threw the enemies at us anyway. So like, why did I even bother with that? That's no fun. It's really, really deflating for players, I think. At least it was for me personally, the few times it's happened. So I'll let you win the social encounters. I'll let you get crazy. I'll let you get creative, but there will be consequences, good and bad, the same way for combats.
Something that's kind of been in my head for the past like week or so is kind of something you touched on. How do you balance not how do you balance the outcomes of an interaction to where they're not always like if the players choose kind of like the quote unquote suboptimal or like the not the good option for whether it's a social encounter or just what have you. How do you balance not always having those be inherently negative reactions that starts to disincentivize the players from like trying like those different things or like trying the more creative options, but like might not just work.
I mean, it goes back to that sense of multiple fail states, kind of an idea of like, yeah, you may have pissed this character off, but rather than like I said, rather than this character is now going to take a swing at you, roll initiative, it might be that they just straight up walk away, and you're going to need to waste time finding a new thing. Now that only applies if they're under a time crunch, like they must do X, Y, and Z before this day. Losing time matters. Like that's a problem, and like that's an easy consequence. If you don't have like a time crunch, it could be again resentment. It could be um, the rest of the tavern won't talk to you now because you've now pissed off one of their regulars. Like I like very understandable and very easy to understand motivational, like I don't want to say punishments, but like it has to fit the game world. It can't just be you rolled bad, therefore bad thing happened. It has to be you didn't succeed, and there are consequences large and small for however that went. And sometimes, again, I'm not perfect at it. Sometimes the punishments seem more realistic than others. Sometimes it's just like I don't know, that was a little awkward. Fuck. Because at the end of the day, it's a game, and this is just a hobby. I don't pretend to be any fucking good at it other than just having fun at it. But I try to at least again make things make sense vibe wise. Does it feel right? Okay, cool. We can all move on and enjoy. And failure has to be the same thing. Does the failure here feel right? Cool.
I like that. I really like that. And again, just kind of taking a breath to think like, what does this actually mean instead of just like, here's the answer. We're starting to wind down our time. So in our kind of last block of questions, what advice would you give for new and or aspiring DMs?
Save your best ideas for your third or fourth campaign, because you're gonna fuck up the first one and two. Uh, it's honestly, it's kind of it feels like depressing advice, but I actually really mean it encouragingly because there's so much to running a game that has nothing to do with how creative you are as a DM. And if you try to put all your eggs in that one basket first, it's really easy to hit burnout. And I say this from personal experience. My first campaign, I very much viewed as a failure because I was having a hard time tracking all the mechanics of it all. Real quick, I had a way too convoluted story because I was trying to cram all my different crazy ideas into a story that honestly couldn't support them. And I got super burnt out and ended up just like saying like, "Hey guys, I'm pulling the plug on this campaign. It's no longer fun for me." Um, which is why that second campaign afterwards was so much more a small local story. And by keeping a lot of the stuff of my world that I thought was really cool out of that story and just focusing on what made sense, like, oh my god, I learned so much in between that first campaign and the second one because I wasn't trying to get every cool creative idea I had of my brain into the game. I wasn't shoehorning it in. So honestly, like my best advice is like learn the game with inconsequential stories. Run other people's one shots. Run your stupid joke one shot because that's when you learn the mechanics of things and you learn your narrative style and you learn how you respond when players do incredibly cool or incredibly stupid things. And then when you have a sense of like how you react to all that, then you like lay all your cool shit on the table and go for that much more complex campaign. So that would be my advice of don't feel the pressure to be amazing in campaign one because a lifetime in my own creative field, like man, it takes years to get good at something, even if it's just a hobby and even if you don't want to be a professional at it, like it's still hard. So know it's hard and be cool with that and let failure be fun because again, if it's a story that like everyone's vibing with and y'all like you don't have a huge ego on, it can totally go off the rails and you can all laugh about it while it's happening. When your ego's involved and the story runs off the rails, man, it sucks and it's so deflating and it hurts.
It's kind of like, when you make pancakes, that first pancake you make, not going to be the best one, but your second or third one, that's when
Yeah,
you
the
take a
first one's
picture.
absolute shit. That's the one you feed the dog.
What do you think is something that every DM or GM should try at least once in their running a game career?
Uh, let a player absolutely break the conceit of a one shot. It is so interesting when you have to throw away all of the mystery of how can you keep the game fun. I had a player in my abandoned museum one who had the archaeologist background, and I had a journal by the bad guy that they were supposed to find, but usually no one speaks the language and yet, but her feature just broke all of that. And halfway through the dungeon, she basically had the blueprints of the dungeon, and it totally took all the mystery of like the traps in the rooms out. And it was one of the best sessions I ever ran because she completely fucked my entire game strategy in a way that was in character, totally not her being a problematic player. And for the next like 2 hours, I basically turned it into a death trap adversarial thing because the ghost got found out. And it was absolutely not the way I planned on running it, but I had to be so much more creative because she absolutely broke it. Um, so let your players break the session on occasion because you get much more creative when you have to adjust.
I love that advice. I also love it if you're just also running a longer campaign. I learned a very similar lesson very late in my running a game career of it's really fun to like have the mystery to your campaign, but I think it is also amazingly fun for the players to figure out what's happening and then the question be, and what are you going to do about it? To where like the mystery is gone, like they figured it out and now it's just like, now what are you going to do?
Yeah, a couple sessions of planning and like make schemes and like when players come up with a whole bunch of schemes, like find a way to make one of their schemes matter, even if it's not going to be the thing that wins. Like give them a win with their good planning. Like reward them for trying to break your story. You don't have to just give the story up, but you got to give them a little bit of give and take because that's what makes the game feel so rewarding. Like yes, maybe you're not going to capture the god by lassoing him with, Wonder Woman's magic lariat, but like maybe you learn something with it. Maybe you tie him down for a turn. Maybe you miss and grab his henchman and turn his head. I don't care. Like, let them break it in some fashion because it's their crazy schemes should be rewarded and not just punished because the rules say that it shouldn't work that way.
Is there, as we again are at our last couple of questions, is there any topics or you know insights that we haven't covered that you wanna get out into the world?
Um, the only one I would mention because I see so many new players, especially, but also GMs like trying to adapt their favorite stories into a campaign. And the thing that I would always suggest is your favorite stories are that way because often the author has total control of the character choices. So many awesome books, comics, manga, TV shows, like those stories don't work as a game story because your characters will all do different things and your characters need equal weight. You can't have like the main hero of the story. So steal worlds and steal conflicts, but don't steal plot points or stories, because if you get attached to those, you're never going to like pull it off the way you see in your brain. So I would say, steal from every media you love, but know what you're stealing and why, because stealing plot points is so much harder, and I think leads to disappointment for players and DMs.
Where can people find you on Altrole? Where do you hang out the most in our fun little Discord?
Kind of depends on if I'm in productions or not, but I'm usually in GM chat or in general. People are always willing to, or always able to find us on that. I try to be very clear if I'm talking to you as a moderator, if I'm talking to you just as another asshole on the server. So we're not scary, I promise. In fact, the less moderating that I do, the happier all of us are. But yeah, I'm always on the server, and if I'm invisible, it just means that I'm probably like on site or on set somewhere. But it doesn't mean that you can't reach out or ping me with ideas or questions.
All right, and then last question: are there any exciting campaigns, projects, ideas that you wanna share?
Let's see, my current campaign's going nice and strong, so I don't know who's gonna end up listening to this, so I'll keep yeah, Jade, I see you, fucking spy. I'll keep plot points to that campaign out of things. But I'm really looking forward to playing a player again. Actually, the nice thing about my current table is there's other DMs in it, and we've been kind of trading off of DM duties. So as much as I'm really enjoying this campaign and want to see how long and how far it goes, I also like being a player. So I'm actually looking forward to playing again once this kind of wraps up in a satisfying way.
All right, Matt, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us about your experience running games and kind of dropping some wisdom. Thank you all in the audience for hanging out with us for the past hour-ish. This is Roll for Insight. We do these pretty frequently here on Altrole, and so check out the other ones that we have as they get posted. Thanks for hanging out, and then I hope we pass the insight check.
Crack your dice, let's roll tonight. All the fun in the spotlight. Inside sharp and laughter bright. We're tuning in for delight. Roll for insight, here we go.